Hello, I'm Mandy Kaplan here with an important message. Throughout the modern era, millions, nay, billions of people have enjoyed countless hours of video games, stars, both Trek and Wars, comic books, and other nerdy endeavors. That's an infinite number of gasps and laughs as 20-sided dice are thrown, Pokemon are caught, and Doctor Who has done whatever the hell they do. Yet one person has missed out on all of this. One woman who doesn't know her droids from her hobbits has been left behind. Until now. That's right. I'm trading in my Taylor Swift and Housewives for superheroes and Wookiees as I finally embrace all things sci-fi and fantasy on my podcast, Make Me a Nerd, with Mandy Kaplan. Each week, a passionate guest will try to baptize me into the world of nerdery as they share one of these iconic entities that I have somehow missed. And you can help. For just $5 a month or $55 a year, you can become a member. For your generous donation, which is less than a new Tesla, you'll not only be supporting my mission, you'll get early access to episodes, bonus content, and more stuff I haven't thought of yet. So please, join me wherever you podcast as I finally learn what all the fuss has been about and see if going through this nerd-education will, in fact, make me a nerd. Or, as they say in Klingon, who am I kidding?
Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Hey, psst. Hey, you see that Snickers over there? If no one's looking, you should just take it.
No! Don't listen to him, my son. That would be stealing, and stealing is a sin.
Sin Schmin, it's a friggin' Snickers bar. You deserve to have it. Sinning really satisfies you.
Repent, my child. Virtue is the only real snack worth savoring. For that candy bar is merely a gateway to nougat damnation. Has this ever happened to you?
Listening to the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and you're not sure what to think?
Then we're here to help. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Tommy Metz III, and this season on All the Feelings, we're examining the 7 deadly sins.
You know, the fun ones.
And the 7 heavenly virtues.
Which are also a thing. Through personal stories, historical oddities, and way too much embarrassment, we take you on a thrilling journey through all the goods and the bads you hear about in church.
But without all that pesky church stuff. So come join us for All the Feelings Season 9, a sometimes funny podcast about being human. All the sins, all the virtues.
All in one place. Go to allthefeelings.fun to learn more, or subscribe to All the Feelings wherever you get your podcasts.
Game over.
Hey there, true believers. Andy Nelson here from the Marvel Movie Minute podcast with the rest of the team.
Pete Wright.
Kyle Olson.
Rob Cabasco.
And Matthew Fox.
This is the podcast where we dissect the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time, exploring every detail of this epic superhero franchise.
In our season looking at Iron Man 3, we're going to mix things up a bit.
That's right. Rob and I are your guides, but instead of our usual minute-by-minute format, we dive into 5 minutes of the film in each weekly episode.
It's a totally new approach, but one that still allows us to explore all the depth and detail that makes these movies so special, even if Iron Man 3 isn't all that special.
Hold on. That's where you're wrong. Extremist, Shane Black.
Yeah. Would you like to look at the Mandarin and Maya Hansen? Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a die-hard Marvel fan or just love deep dives into movies, there's something for everyone on Marvel Movie Minute.
Suit up and join us on this epic audio adventure. You can find us at truestory.fm or by searching Marvel Movie Minute on your favorite podcatcher.
Because in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, every minute is packed with excitement.
Enough said.
Hooked on you, baby, you're golden. Time moves, I never noticed. Just can't get enough. Got me wonderstruck.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Make Me a Nerd. I'm Mandy Kaplan, a mainstream mom whose mission it is to explore the world of nerd culture I've been missing out on and slightly afraid of my whole life. I have been very nerdy lately, I feel. I'm quite proud of myself for reading Fourth Wing, and now I know all about dragon porn, something I never thought I would be privy to. Guys, it comes up everywhere I go. People want to talk Fourth Wing, not because I'm bringing it up. It is so popular right now and so part of the zeitgeist, and now I get to be a part of the conversation. This week's episode is about as nerdy as it gets for me. It also reminds me of how the word nerd used to maybe be an insult, and now we embrace it and we all want to be a nerd. And I found my guest online. Not like dating online, but I found him online, and he hosts a fantastic podcast called 5 Random Questions. He is the head of podcast support and experience at Captivate. And I basically tricked him into doing my podcast. And I'm very excited to be with him in person. Welcome, Danny Brown.
Thank you very much, Mandy. And I don't think you tricked me. I think that's you asked very nicely, and it was a very nice email.
Pressured, manipulated, blackmailed. We don't have to get into the specifics, but here you are.
Here I am, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So I found 5 Random Things, which is a really fun, loose chat podcast. Can you tell everybody about it?
Yeah, sure. So as the name suggests, I ask, it's like an interview style show, entertainment interview style show. And I ask my guests 5 random questions that I generate by a random question generator. I have an online generator. So the guest doesn't know what the question is. I don't know what the question is. So I ask the question and we talk about it. And at the end of the episode, the guest, because I've had him in the hot seat for the last, 30, 40 minutes or however long the episode may be, they then get to ask me a question of their own. So it kind of flips the script a little bit and points it right back at me.
Now, aside from me, because I will be on an upcoming episode, because Turnabout is fair play, how do you find your guests? Are they all part of your circle? Are they people who come to you like I did? Or
yeah, it's a bit of a mixture. There's people I want to have on the show, so I'll reach out directly, either by email if I've got their contact info, or reach out on a social. Hey, I'd love you to be on my podcast. Can I reach out to you? That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Good people like yourself that reach out and say, "Hi, I found your podcast over at Think Media," for example. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a good mixture there. Would you like to do like a guest swap, so to speak? And then some, it's just, I'll get some recommendations. So there's a gentleman called Frank Rassiopi who has a company called Earworthy Media, and he really is a vocal supporter of indie podcasts. So he'll recommend, and creators, etc. So he'll recommend some people to me as well, and I'll check their content out.
Fantastic. I might need that info. Has anybody cried on your show?
Not this one. Not yet. I haven't got them to cry yet. On a previous podcast I had way back when, a gentleman, one of my guests, did cry. He was telling a very emotional story he hadn't shared with anybody. And we had to pause the podcast for a little bit.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. So and I asked him, I can cut this. We don't have to, submit this. It can be pulled from the episode. But he was fine. He says, no, it's part of me. It's part of who I am. So let's keep it in there. So yeah.
Well, I have surprisingly cried 3 times on the first season of Make Me a Nerd. I keep doing it, and it's been with the same guest.
You need to stop asking the guest back.
They just make me cry.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I asked you what you would like to nerd out about, your suggestion was very interesting because it wasn't necessarily a film or a book. It was a topic that you then graciously sent me a YouTube documentary about, and it's the Great Console War between Sega and Nintendo in the 80s and 90s. And obviously you have some interest in this. You were a gamer. Are a gamer?
Yep, I'm in my 50s. So I was at the time of the 80s and 90s, I was probably round about late teens going into early 20s. So that was peak as a male in the UK. That was peak video game age. But I still game today, not as much. My son's taken over the mantle of video gamer in the house, and he won't let me on the Xbox. But yeah, that was my era, the 80s and 90s especially with as you mentioned, Mandy, Sega and Nintendo, there was like a really great battle going on between these two companies during that time frame.
There was also something in the air back then because it was like Miller versus Bud Light and Coke versus Pepsi. Like people wanted to stoke the fires of these brand battles, I feel.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting you mentioned these ones there. I think you had a really cool split, which made it easier to support your preferred, brand. Is you either had the safe, respectable brand that everybody can, connect with, if you like, and then you've got like the upstart, the one that wants to do things a little bit differently. So the brands that you mentioned, and then obviously Sega, Nintendo. Nintendo is very much the family-friendly brand. Whereas Sega really wanted to, throw things up a bit. So yeah, much like the Bud and the Miller stuff going on there.
And I am an asshole. I didn't write down the name of the person who put together this documentary on YouTube. Do you have that name?
I am also an asshole. I don't have it to hand. I apologize.
That is okay. Tell you what, everybody, Pete, my dear friend and producer, I will send you the link, Pete, and you can put it in the show notes if anybody would like to check out this hour and 30-minute thing I watched, which really broke this all down and got me up to speed, I hope. But I will say things that are totally wrong. Heads up, Danny. I learned that Sega started in 1946, which sounds impossible, but they started by bringing U.S. slot machines to Hawaii. They were like an import company. And then they outlawed that. And that's when they turned to creating arcade games and such.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought about today, my industry. I don't know what you do on the side or if you're strictly a podcaster, but it's all being threatened by AI. And I look back at Sega in 1946 being told, oh, your business is being shut down. And they pivoted. They came up with a new model and a new way to innovate and keep going and thrive. And I found that inspiring.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it was like for the GIs as well at the end of the Second World War. A lot of that was like the pachinko machines as well that they made after, the original business was sort of outlawed. We're still talking to that. So it was interesting. It's like a Japanese company that whether it had to do with the war ending as it did for Japan at the time, and they needed to sort of reinvent themselves for the Western audience. But yeah, it's like it's kind of cool to look at, when you look back at it as that time and what they did. And especially, your parallels with AI today. Like I work for a podcast hosting company. That's my day job. And I'm obviously in podcasting like yourself. We're talking now. So I see exactly where AI can be damaging to creators. But I also see where it does have its benefits and its pluses. It's all about using it properly and adapting it for your needs, and kind of like what Sega did with their business, right?
Right. I didn't get much about how Nintendo started. Did I just do laundry and miss it, or?
No, I think Nintendo was also, and I'm probably very wrong here because I was always a Sega guy at heart.
Okay.
I do have a bias on this
waiting to ask your loyalty.
I do have a Sega loyalty. I do appreciate Nintendo, but I do have a Sega loyalty. But I do believe they also started out, and I could be 100% wrong, and I'm sure some Nintendo fans are going to come hunt me down online and just correct me.
I will give out your home address.
Don't do that, please. But I think they started out obviously as like a sort of pachinko, sort of gambling, arcade coin-based company. But again, I could be 100% wrong.
Okay. They didn't focus on it as much. They really covered how Sega grew and came to be. And then, so they were creating pinball and arcade and other things. And then in 1972, along comes Pong, which was not Sega nor Nintendo, but it inspired Sega to jump on that bandwagon and to think, well, we can do this too. Am I misspeaking?
No, I think Atari, I don't even know if it was Atari that owned Pong at the time.
It wasn't at the time.
Yeah. So they bought the rights from Nolan Bushnell, I think, when Pong came out. Pong completely changed a lot of things. It made, and it seems really primitive looking back at it now. But at the time, if you were a kid in the 70s, and even to a degree the early 80s, and you had Pong on your TV at home, you were posh. You had friends all coming to your house for that.
Okay. So I have a memory of playing in my parents' bedroom on their little TV. So I know we had it. My memory is that we didn't have an Atari. I will go into my sob story in a moment, but we had no consoles. We were not allowed that kind of stuff. But I think my dad somehow borrowed it from a
Mhm.
coworker, and we had it for a week. And it was I didn't want to do anything else. It was Pong. It was, we thought, incredible.
Yeah,
Did you play Pong?
I did, and I think we had it on ColecoVision or
Mhm.
ColecoVision or whatever that was called. I don't know how to pronounce
Coleco,
it.
I think is how it
ColecoVision,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we had one of these old wooden kind of weird console things, and I guess that was my first experience of a console. And it wasn't ours, much like you. It was more, I think it was a rich uncle who actually owned the console, and he'd bring it over on Sundays, and the family would gather around this little 14-inch
Right?
TV, thinking it was awesome.
Right. These TVs were tiny and like bubble screens. And yeah,
Yeah.
a brief sidebar to tell my story. I, I was in a theater program when I was a teenager. We all came from all over the country and all over the world, essentially, to do a summer theater program. We were sitting in our first class together, and that for some reason the instructor said, "We're going to go around the circle, tell everybody where you're from, and just to get some conversation going, tell us what your socioeconomic background is," which was offensive and shocking. This was obviously many, many, many
Mm.
years ago when I was a teenager. And everybody's going around. And now we had all flown to this program, and everyone was saying, I was upper middle class, I was upper middle class, I was upper middle class. And um, then we get to this young man, and he says, I find this really inappropriate and uncomfortable. And I'm here on scholarship, and I did not grow up upper middle class. And I want to walk out. Like, screw you all for having this conversation. And the room got quiet, and we kept going, and we got to me, and I said, I grew up middle class, and you know, my parents did not believe in giving us the latest toys. We never had a Nintendo or an Atari. And the guy who said he was on scholarship said, even I had Nintendo. And everybody just burst out laughing, and all the tension went out of the room. But I was never allowed any of these things. So I always went to friends' houses and was like, oh, in television. Do you remember that one with like the circle dial?
Yep, little paddle. Yeah.
Pitfall. So and that was the end of my video gaming career. Past 1986 or something, I never did it. But so I don't know why I felt the need to share that story with you, but these things were in the early 80s, not for every house, not readily accessible. They were special and rare.
Yeah. Well, even like you mentioned, I know the TVs were small, and there were big tube TVs like at the back. They were small size, but they were massive at the back, so they needed these big tubes. But even TVs were a luxury that not a lot of houses, would have, and certainly not a second TV, and certainly not TVs in your kid's bedroom now. That they're really going to sound super old and crudgy to hear, but kids really don't understand how bad it was. When we were younger, and
Right.
I'm surely older than you. So, but when we were younger, it was just like different.
Oh, it was very different. Although I'm the one now who's like, we have to have a TV every 5 feet in my house. I can't be without the noise and the entertainment. But it was when we start this story with Pong, and then Sega comes out with their version of Pong. And then we start to see something that looks like a very primitive Pac-Man. And we're seeing these early graphics.
Mm.
And the way this nameless gentleman cut this thing together, you get to see how these animations and graphics grew and changed year after year. And it's pretty cool how far they went from little lines and dots.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you look at the graphics today, and you look back at Sega, Nintendo from the 80s and 90s, and the original Sonics and maybe Marios, and Link from the Legend of Zelda, etc. And you think, man, how could you even play these games? Although some people call it retro and old school now, and they'll deliberately play it on Steam or download emulators or whatever to play the original versions. But yeah, I mean, at the time, going from Pong or going from maybe even a Donkey Kong that was still really 8-bit blocky squares, to, when Nintendo and Sega brought out their 16-bit machines and Sonic, and that really came to the fore. It was just like a huge generational leap, and you thought, this is like having an arcade in your home almost.
Yeah. Do you remember some of the first games you played on Sega?
Yeah, so my first experience with Sega was on the old Master System. I think it was Master System 2. And it was Alex Kidd, because that was booted in with the game.
That was the little monkey we saw jumping around a
Yeah,
lot?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Alex Kidd in Wonderland or something like that. But yeah, Alex Kidd was the game that was booted in. And then there was like a Phantasy Star Online, a Shining Force game, which is like an RPG role-playing game. So yeah, it was just like, it was really simple, basic Golden Axe. I played that in the arcade, and then I played a really clunky version of it at home, but it was playing Golden Axe at home, so it was awesome.
What is Golden Axe?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Oh,
Golden
okay.
Axe is, I keep forgetting to explain things. My bad. So Golden Axe is just it's like a slashy, beat 'em up kind of thing. You've got three main characters: a dwarf, like not a centurion, but like a Conan kind of, a barbarian, I guess. And then I believe there was an archer, if I remember. That was the third character, and you had to like scroll from left to right. It was like a sort of platformer, beating up, or chopping down bad guys and evil dudes, what have you.
Okay. Yeah, I never played the violent ones. Like, I liked Pac-Man and stuff, but I never played anything more PG-13 than that. As they're telling the story, it is very back and forth. Sega came out with this, then Nintendo came out with this, then Sega topped it, then Nintendo topped it. And Nintendo tends to take over and be the Coke versus Sega's Pepsi pretty soon into this war. But they are mentioning other consoles, the TurboGrafx 16, the Neo Geo ADS.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you know of these.
Yeah, well, every kid wanted the Neo Geo. This was a Japanese import, and you could only get it from Japan. You couldn't buy it in the West. So if you wanted to buy it, it'd be something like $800 to $1,000 then. So you can imagine how much it would cost in today's price. The games were mostly on the Neo Geo. It was mostly arcade fighting games, but they were pretty much arcade perfect, because the board inside the Neo Geo was pretty much the same as the board that was in arcade games that Neo Geo did in the arcades. So it was probably the first console where you actually got arcade, or almost arcade perfect, games at home.
But it never got widespread because of the price?
No, that was always a cult classic. It was a Neo Geo. Every gamer wanted a Neo Geo.
Okay. Good to know. Have you ever played it?
I haven't played the Neo Geo. I did play some of the games when I had the 3DO, which is a console. It was like a console that was made by a bunch of different manufacturers. It was a combined effort between Panasonic, Sanyo. I think Hitachi had one. Gold Star, sorry, had a version as well. So that was like a CD-based console that was kind of out about the same time as Sega was starting to come out of the console business back in the mid-90s or so.
Okay. Well, as I said, this back and forth between Sega and Nintendo seemed pretty friendly until Genesis came out with an ad that the tagline was, "Genesis does what Nintendo don't."
Yep.
Shots fired.
Oh, yeah. And again, it goes back. I mean, this was very much the North American ad campaign. When I was a gamer at the time with Genesis, it was called the Mega Drive over in the UK, and I think probably Europe as well. So they're a slightly different ad campaign, but it was very much geared towards the same kind of thing. It was like, we're the cool kids. We can do what Nintendo don't, Nintendo can. And yeah, I think this is what really set them apart. Sega wanted to try the risky kind of in-your-face marketing, whereas Nintendo was all about kind of like the franchise and the IPs that they had, and said, okay, we've got Mario, we've got Zelda, we've got XYZ, and everybody that wants to play these games comes to Nintendo. So Sega had to sort of kind of get their own mascots and build from the bottom, and that allowed them to say what they did. We've got the fast guy, Sonic the Hedgehog dude compared to Mario, etc.
Right. So Sonic, I had never heard of until the movie came out, I don't know, 6 years ago or something. And Casey, my son, wanted to see it. And we went to see it. It was very cute. But I didn't realize Sonic went all the way back to the 80s and had a Mario-like following and loyalty. but they talked very briefly about how Sonic was originally designed. And originally he had a Madonna-esque girlfriend. Did you catch that?
Yeah, it's funny. The Sega's team at the time did do a lot of inspiration. It took a lot of inspiration from American pop artists. So Madonna, as you mentioned, Sonic's red shoes were based on Michael Jackson's Bad album cover.
Oh, okay.
So they took a lot of inspiration from the West and from a design point of view. So yeah, it's funny how, and again, Madonna was very much anti-establishment, she still is. But especially when she first came out in the 80s, very anti-establishment and, with her songs, her approach, her designs, etc. And that tied perfectly with Sega and what they wanted to do.
Well, it's just funny to think of a cute little hedgehog having this Jessica Rabbit-esque looking woman with the short, it was Madonna, like when she did Cherish on the beach and she had the short spiky blonde hair. And it was a strange thing that girlfriend didn't make it to the game, right?
No, Amy, who turned into Sonic's girlfriend in later games, she was more aligned with his breed of animal.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So that just brought up something for me, and I don't know if you're going to think I'm nuts, but that's okay. So the point of a lot of these games was this very hetero mission to rescue the princess or find love and all of that. Were there any games designed, I'm sure there are now, but were there any games designed for gay kids or, the queer community to not be in pursuit of their hetero love?
That's a really good question, Mandy. I don't think there was specifically for the gay LGBT community. I know Sega brought out Echo the Dolphin in the, I want to say the late 80s, but it might be in the mid 90s. That was more about opening it up to gamers, a wider gaming audience. Because as you mentioned, a lot of the video games at that time were very much for boys, teen boys in their bedrooms playing the consoles. Rightly or wrongly, that was the audience for for the manufacturers. But it was, as games became more popular and graphics got better and, it became more accepted to be a video gamer, there was a massive audience, obviously, that wasn't getting served by the games that were out. So Echo came out. Link was always, gender neutral on the Nintendo, for example. That's the Legend of Zelda character.
Yes.
So Link was always gender neutral, for the gender neutral audience as well. I still think video games today have an issue when it comes to serving, underrepresented communities. But back then, definitely, I would say there probably wasn't really good games that came out for these audiences.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it now, and I've seen my husband play some of these. I don't see a ton of people of color or, characters representing anything other than hetero white people.
Yeah, you tend to find it more on the indie game development market. So one of the reasons I like Xbox is I see that as a natural successor to the Sega platforms that I used to play. And they've got a great indie community called ID4. And they make games for everybody. They've got very diverse teams, very multicultural teams, and that comes across in their characters and really shines, light on, as you mentioned, people of color, underrepresented communities, minorities. So there's definitely a much better indie scene when it comes to that kind of stuff for sure.
Yeah, it really hadn't occurred to me, and now I'm a little ashamed that it hadn't. But maybe you and I should team up and go on Shark Tank and pitch this and make millions. We'll talk after the show. When you were a Sega lover, let's say your 18-year-old self and you're playing Sega, was there genuine tension between you and your Nintendo loving friends? Or was it playful and like, oh, cool, I have the Nintendo, come on over and play my console and then we'll go to your place next weekend?
Yeah, I would say it probably veered more towards the former. As you get older, you get more, more mature, you'd like to think. But yeah, at the time, the kids on the street or the kids at school or whatever would either be hardcore Nintendo or hardcore Sega. And they might come over, you'd hang out with your friends, obviously, and you do other things outside of video games. That was fine. But when it came to video games, if I invite them over to play, let's say Mortal Kombat on the Mega Drive or the Genesis, because that had blood enabled and the Nintendo version didn't,
Right.
then that's fine for them to come over. They'd play that. But if I was trying to get them to play other games, etc., no, I'm going to stay home. I'll play my games and then we'll meet up later and do X, Y, Z. So it wasn't like fisticuff tension, but there was, no, I'm not getting into that.
Oh, it wasn't West Side Story with some dance fighting.
No, none of us could dance. Well, some of us could dance. I couldn't dance. So yeah, none of that, unfortunately. But yeah, there was definitely the divide there.
And here I am blissfully unaware of any of this. I mean, I literally didn't know the difference. I thought it was like called a Sega Nintendo. I had no idea there were two companies and that there was a divide. When the Game Boys came out and the handhelds, did you veer into that?
I didn't. My sister did. She loved. I worked in an electronics retail store at the time, and I got a really good deal on a Game Boy, so I got her that for Christmas one year, and it came with the Tetris, classic Tetris built in.
Yeah.
And my whole family got addicted to Tetris. Everybody would be trying to beat, everybody's high score. And I tried it a few times. I enjoyed it, but it was just the screen was too small. It was like monochrome color, and it just didn't, for me, used to the speed of Sonic, the bright colors of the Sega games, etc. It wasn't quite there. So I played the Sega Game Gear, which was their handheld.
Right.
But that was like a really wide, clunky, uncomfortable thing to hold.
Oh.
But it let you play your Genesis games on it. So that was my one.
Gotcha. Yeah, I watched so much of this footage and thought, I'm not a gamer, I never was. But these older games were so redundant. I watched so much footage of a character like run, 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 jump, run, 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 jump, run, 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 jump. What is it that appeals to you about that? Because to me, it was like, do something else. I would get bored so easily back then. And
yeah, I think it's you have to remember, obviously, and you just mentioned it then back then. So back then it seemed new and exciting. And you're coming from Pong, that was basically a flat screen with two little blips and a ball going back and forth. And that was the big game, prior to Nintendo and Sega really taking video games forward. You couldn't bring a Neo Geo across or anything like that. So it was, platformers were big because it was simple to get into. You could understand it. You didn't have to look at the controller and think of 6 different button combinations to pull off a kill move in Mortal Kombat, for example. You could just go forward, jump, etc. So it was fun to ease yourself into video games, and then you sort of go, forward from there. But I think it was just the fact that you had, if you were lucky enough to have a console at home, you had video games in your home. And, you finish your homework or whatever, if you weren't outside playing with your friends, you could just switch a video game and play it, whatever that looked like.
I like that you say you finished your homework, like your parents might be listening and, you were just testifying. Yes, I finished my homework first.
Oh, yeah.
And you ate your vegetables and you brushed your teeth. Then you played video games.
Yeah. We were I was a very typical Scottish family with a strict dad and not quite strict, but still strict mom. So you did not want to piss them off at all.
Okay, good to know. Different episode. So this, when they started to show Donkey Kong, I wanted to ask you if you've ever, I'm taking another tangent. Did you ever see the documentary King of Kong?
I think I did. That's the guy that wanted to beat the high score, right? The all-time record high score. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I watched that on Netflix or something, whatever it's streamed.
My gosh. I love that. I did it for the podcast, and I love how seriously everybody took it. The intensity and at one point, the main guy who has the high score sends 2 thugs halfway across the country to check the machine of his competitor because it might be not street legal. And I was amazed and amused by that movie.
No, and video games now are a huge market. It's like a multi-billion-dollar market. But I think back then, especially at that time, with the Kong competition and with the sort of Sega Nintendo war between the 80s and 90s, it just felt like a different, approach. Like you were really, now you might have an Xbox and if you're lucky, you might have an Xbox and a PlayStation or an Xbox and a Nintendo or something like that in your home, whether you play or your kid plays one and you play the whatever. But normally you have, you'll have multi-consoles. Back then, no one would ever have multiple consoles. So you were very hardcore about who you went with. You either went with Sega, you went with Nintendo. So I can completely get why when the Kong contest was out, why people were so hardcore at wanting to win this and making sure nobody was cheating, etc.
Oh, look, I'm passionate about other things, so I would understand getting worked up about those other things. But it just feels extreme, that movie. When did Atari enter the scene? This documentary didn't really mention it, but they really were the one I remember being the most ubiquitous.
Yeah, so I remember playing Atari games in the arcades back in the 70s, late 70s, like lunches at school, high school, or whatever. Was I in high school then? Whenever. Anyway, I remember playing them in the 70s, and then home games in the 80s. They, much like Sega, didn't have a very good 90s and kind of fell away from a hardware point of view. They still make software now, but I don't think they make any hardware. So yeah, Atari was a huge company at one stage. Like, they were probably the number 3, at least certainly in the West. They were probably the number 3 gaming company, around. So yeah, they were huge at one time.
They were number 3? I imagine them to be number 1. But what do I know?
It's possible. Like I was in the UK and Europe at the time, and
Right.
Atari were big there, but more for computers. So you had Atari and Commodore, which was the 2 big computer brands back in the UK. So from a video game point of view, you knew of Atari, but it was more in the US and North America. So it's possible they were even bigger than, certainly Sega were massive in the US or North America in the 90s, but Atari may have been number 2 maybe, or up there.
Gotcha. They also mentioned something called the Turbo Express that came out. 6 batteries only lasted 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah. The problem
Screw
was...
you, Turbo Express.
Well, and in fairness, I mean, not in fairness, that's a ridiculous amount of battery power to go through.
Right.
But in fairness, the Sega Game Gear that I had, Atari had the Atari Lynx, which was another handheld, very similar to the Game Gear. It was very elongated, rectangular thing.
Mhm.
But the screen was a big screen for a handheld. It was bright colors, a full color screen. The equivalent of the Sega Nintendo, the Sega, I was calling it the Sega Nintendo, the Sega Genesis games, the equivalent of these on a handheld. So there was a lot of processing power being used. So ideally, you would only be using it on short car trips or something like that. It's not set up, for long gaming on the batteries.
Wow. If I were a parent back then, I would have been like, no way am I funding this habit with the amount of batteries we would have to buy.
It's why we have an Xbox battery charger. So they have reusable batteries now.
Right.
And our kids have that, like a battery pack for the Xbox controller. Otherwise, we'd go through so many AA batteries.
Right?
So many. Yeah.
Sorry, Duracell, you're out of luck. We really didn't get any information about the people behind the war. There was a lot of information about, so this company acquired this title and this company improved upon last year's version. But do you know anything about these CEOs and was there actual tension between these companies, and were there, machinations going on where people were trying to steal ideas or screw over the other company? I want more like Succession energy from this.
Yeah, so I would say the bigger fight was internal with Sega Japan and Sega of America. Because Sega of Japan were very much like Nintendo. So Nintendo's a very typical Japanese company with, certain traditions and the way they want to do business, etc. And it was very different from the North American approach or the US approach to how they wanted to do things. So Tom Kalinske, who was the Sega, I think he was the CEO of Sega in the US throughout the 90s, like the big, successful times, had a massive, not a massive falling out, but butted heads a lot of times with the CEO of Sega Japan and the head honchos at Sega Japan. And that came as a different topic, but that came to a head during the Genesis's second success, so the Dreamcast, which was Sega's last hardware before they left the market. So yeah, they were always butting heads about what games to bring to the market. Did they want to include blood in the Mortal Kombat game? What was going to be their mascots? What were they going to pack in games with the consoles to compete with Nintendo, etc.? So I would say there was definitely a lot of tension. I feel Nintendo and Sega of Japan's head honchos respected each other because they both come from the same backgrounds, essentially. They're both, but the US probably tied perfectly into Sonic being the upstart. Sega US or Sega of America was the upstart. Sega of Japan, much like Nintendo, was the more family-friendly, version of the company.
Okay.
So when you get like an upstart teenager going up against the head of the family, you're going to butt heads and have some fun there.
Okay. I wish we learned more about that. Just, there were so many, it was so much about the games rather than the actual war. It's called the Great Console War. I wanted more war from this documentary. But, also he didn't have access to boardrooms and private meetings. And so I don't know where he would have come up with all that stuff.
There is a great, sorry, Mandy,
Yeah.
there is a great series on, I'm going to say, Apple TV. It could be Prime. I'll let you know. And obviously, if your producer wants to drop it into the show notes afterwards. But it actually goes deeper into the battleground behind what was happening with Sega and Nintendo and what was happening in the boardrooms, what was happening with the IPs, etc. And it's really interesting, if you're interested in this topic, to see exactly what was happening behind the scenes there as well.
Yeah. Is that a documentary or a fictionalized?
No, it's a documentary. So it takes a lot of like news stories at the time and then, flashes that out with the producers and that talking over, etc. But real interesting for anybody that's interested in, what happened between Sega and Nintendo and what happened and what impact that had on games moving forward.
Yeah. And also, were they poaching? And, if you worked for one company, did you have a non-compete and you couldn't work with the other company? And I want to know those things.
Yeah, I feel if you were working for Nintendo, you would never go to work for Sega. At least if you were higher up. I could be wrong, but I feel much like I wouldn't play my friends' Nintendos and they wouldn't play my Segas. That'd probably be, I'm sure there was moves made, etc. But I feel from a loyalty and an honor point of view from the Japanese, honor and cultural system there, I feel maybe you'd maybe be disowned by your family if you went from Nintendo to Sega or whatever.
Right. You mentioned Mortal Kombat, and that feels like a turning point for everything, for society, for the gaming world. It was just purely violence. And because Sega allowed actual blood, Nintendo's version failed of Mortal Kombat or didn't sell like Sega's. But there's something so disturbing about Mortal Kombat to me, and I don't mean to offend you. I know you played it.
No, for sure.
But it's so upsetting to think they said there was a graphic or when you got your opponent down and they were laying on the ground bleeding, it would pop up like finish them off. And that is so disturbing to me. But you don't find it that way? You find it fun and not upsetting?
It's interesting. I mean, I think as a gamer, you would look at the game and know it's not real. You look at graphics today, and sometimes it can be really hard to tell, if it's a game, if you're watching a movie or whatever. And I feel when you get super violent games that are just excessive, and Mortal Kombat is excessive, but I feel at the time, it was still sprites and blocky sprites, and yes, it did have finishing moves where you'd rip spleens out or, burn people, alive, flamethrower them, whatever. There was some very graphic finishing
adorable
moves, yeah, exactly. But it did, I feel kids were, for the most part, adult enough to know, even though we were just teens, we were adult enough to know this is just a game, it's not real. You wouldn't go out and try pull someone's spleen out or something, right? And I feel that's
wouldn't,
where...
Danny, but you don't know me.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I do feel that then that raised an interesting debate and conversation at the time. I know, like that was there was a bunch of US Senate hearings when Mortal Kombat came out. The rating system that hadn't been in place before, the ESRB rating system, came out because of that game.
But they left it in the hands of the gaming companies to develop their own rating system.
Yeah, and that probably should have happened. I mean, this is a good thing that came from the controversy of Mortal Kombat. As you mentioned, it is a graphic game, and possibly at the time it looked more graphic because you weren't used to 16-bit graphics, and and how that might have looked compared to a plumber on Nintendo doing his little job, right?
Right.
So yeah, completely get that. But I feel that if your 12-year-old or 13-year-old kid is playing a game that's clearly and I'm going to put my parents down here. I apologize if you're listening. But if you knowingly let your kid play a game like that and you're happy with that, that can also be on a parents. Because even if you just see it once, you're not sure that the game's getting played, but you see it once on the screen, it's then up to you to say why the kid shouldn't play it or why your kid should play it. So I feel there's responsibility all around. Yes, the gaming companies came out and they did have the rating system. Could governments done more, or should they have stayed out anyway? And like the whole, it goes back to, Sega was the upstart and pushing back against authority, and that's what got them their fans. So when this whole thing happened about Mortal Kombat and the Senate hearings, etc., I kind of feel that played into Sega's hands a bit, and maybe even made it worse than it could have been, because now people wanted to play the Sega version because it had the blood, because it got all the controversy.
Yeah. That makes sense. For us, I don't know how old your son is.
I got teens, so I've got my boy's 15 and my daughter's 13.
Okay, my son is almost 15. And it was Fortnite, right? All the kids started playing Fortnite, and we would not let him play first-person shooters. And it was interesting because I had a friend who was like, well, all the parents at my school signed a pact that we wouldn't let our kids play Fortnite because I mean, third grade for, young kids.
Yeah.
And I said, I think that's terrific. And then like 2 weeks later, well, I didn't break the pact first, but Susie broke the pact, and then Janice broke the pact. So now all of our kids play Fortnite. It lasted like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because once a kid gets a hit of that, they just want more. And, I'm a real softie and a pacifist, so I find it disturbing, but that's, I guess, the world we live in. And my son does play first person shooters now that his brain is a little more developed. We thought, okay, we'll let him do it. But I understand this. I'm not like a conservative Tipper Gore, but I understand the world being disturbed by Mortal Kombat.
No, and you look at it now, I mean, obviously the graphics have moved on leaps and bounds from when I got into gaming back in the 80s and 90s. So yeah, I can completely understand it, when you look at what some games, you look at Doom, for example, which is like a very visceral, violent game. So yeah, I do feel a lot of it can be parental responsibilities, as you pointed out there, Mandy. It's up to parents to say what you can and can't do. Kids will rebel against that. They'll find ways to play it. I think as long as you can share why you don't want them to play, and why they hope they understand that, etc. And then it's done in moderation, introduce them. But I'd rather have, and this might be the wrong answer, the wrong viewpoint, I'd rather have kids playing a violent video game than doing violent stuff in the street.
Sure.
So I completely get that and understand it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that we know about causation and effect with the video games yet. And, there was the satanic panic of the 80s with the violent music and all of that. I don't know where I come down, but I do worry about it with how violent. And obviously Mortal Kombat seems like child's play now with what is out there. It's all foreign to me. And I did try to play Zelda for this podcast, and I failed spectacularly. I couldn't get the hang of it. And it was, my marriage barely survived with my husband yelling, just jump, just jump, just jump. And I would just go off a cliff and over and over and over. It's not for me, but I love how much people love it. My husband is doing Red Dead Redemption right now, and he's loving it. And it's bringing him back to this childhood nostalgic feeling of being so into a video game. And it's great. It's just not for me.
No, and I think that goes back to your point earlier about the simple platforming, just walking left to right, doing a little jump now and again. And why would you want to do that? And I think it's just escapism, right? The world can be a crappy place. So it's nice, especially as you get older, right? There's so many things that you don't want to have responsibility for. So it's nice just to, escape into that. And whatever your escape mechanism is, if it's like playing a video game, if it's having a nice glass of wine in a bath, if it's going to watch a movie, if it's sitting in the park reading a book, whatever that is, I think it's always nice to have.
Right. I would love a bath in the park with a book and a glass of wine, but that's not.
It's frowned upon. I don't know why. Right? Don't know
Did
why.
we say that at the same time?
We did. Yeah, we know.
Did we
know
just
this
become
stuff.
best friends?
We did.
Well, are there any other final points about the Great Console War you want to make?
You know what? I think the main thing was like I always enjoyed it. Like I said, I was in the UK at the time, and the marketing there was really if you like compare it to like music. So Sega's marketing was very much MTV style, very vibrant, bright colors, very, like I mentioned, it had ties, and you said Madonna, it had ties to Michael Jackson. It was very much about quick eye-grabbing visuals, whereas Nintendo was very much about here's our IPs, here's our Mario, here's our Zelda, etc. So I loved the fact that Sega did that. The problem was they took the success of the 90s and tried to replicate that they took the success of the 80s and early 90s, tried to replicate that into the later 90s, but you can't stay in the same lane, right? And Nintendo realized that. They tried different things with the Virtual Boy, with the Wii, and the controller that you could move and it'd move on screen, etc. So it for me, it's a great time. It's like it's the zenith of video games. It's a shame Sega took the missteps they did, because I miss Sega, the hardware company. I love their games, but I miss the hardware that they used to make and some of the cool features they had. So I still won't be a Nintendo person. I will play their games, but now I've moved to Xbox because of my Sega love.
Well, I'm glad you stayed loyal through it all, and you can play the Sega properties on other platforms.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, they moved. They stopped making hardware back in 2001, and now it's just a software company.
After they also had a failed network, which I found so interesting. Like they
Yeah,
had it looked like public access TV, like a Sega network.
Yeah, so the Sega Network, they were the first company, or the first video game company anyway, to have really good broadband gaming for anybody. So yeah, they just did a lot of things that could work really well. But this is when, like I said, the infighting between Sega of Japan and Sega of Nintendo hurt the company, and they made a bunch of missteps that just put people off. And then you had another Japanese company, and come Sony, comes out with a PlayStation and really ripped the rulebook up.
Bastards. All right. Well, I am going to tell everybody my little bit of business, and then I would love if you would tell everybody where they can hear more from you. Make Me a Nerd is a production of True Story FM, engineering and production by the peerless Pete Wright. My theme song is Wonderstruck by Jane and the Boy. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave me a review. Hit that 5-star. Let me know what you think. If you have suggestions of things you want me to delve into, I'm happy to do it. But the more reviews, the more my podcast can grow, and that is wonderful, and I am grateful. If you're feeling extra supportive, please go to makemeanerd.com/join. If you join the membership, you get your episodes ad-free and early, and bonus content that non-members don't get. And to be honest, it helps me keep the lights on, as they say, and I love being on this journey. I don't want it to end. So please consider, you know who you are, my friends who tell me, I listen to your podcast, but you're not members. I'm calling you out. Please consider joining and continue this journey with me, and thank you all very much. Now, that's my spiel. Danny Brown, where can everybody find you and your podcasts?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to do, Mandy, is go to DannyPod, DannyPod.com. Really simple. And that's got the 3 podcasts that I currently have. So I've got 2 of my own hosted shows and 1 that I co-host. I'm currently focusing on 5 Random Questions, because that just dropped season 3. And I believe you're going to be a guest on the season 3 run, which is going to be awesome. So yeah, you can find that at 5randomquestions.com. But again, if you want to find any of the podcasts, just check out where I hang out, links to socials, etc. Go to DannyPod.com and all the stuff's there.
How did you get the name Danny Pod? That seems like that would be hard to get.
It was just available. I mean, obviously, Danny, that's good. pod, short for podcast. So maybe, there's not a lot of Danny's that are podcasters that are looking for a URL called Danny Pod. But yeah, I thought I just went to my name cheap registrar and just typed in, a bunch of different things, and Danny Pod popped up. Yeah, that's
Muzzle
easy,
tough.
quick.
That's incredible. All right. As instructed by Pete, I am not going to tell you what's coming up next because I have no idea, but lots of fun stuff. And thank you all for listening. And thank you, Danny, for joining me.
Thank you.